Sound and resonance in ancient Egypt with Sebastian Lonberg. You are listening to Brothers of the Serpent podcast.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, angels and demons and monsters and serpents. This is Brothers of the Serpent podcast, and we are coming to you not live from the 10 by 10 by 10 tangent cube of science, nestled amongst the dusty bones of an ancient seabed high atop the Edwards Plateau. And we got a great show for you guys this week. It was an interview with a friend of ours who was on the Egypt trip with us, Sebastian, who is also an audio engineer. You'll hear all of that and his CV when we talk to him in the interview later. But yeah, this was a fantastic conversation. And of course, we're diving into the acoustical properties of, there you go, there's the 30 hertz frequency that we heard about in the interview. So you might need headphones for this one. And also, we did do video, but I don't think we ended up showing too many things that needed to be shared, right?
Yeah, there wasn't a whole lot that needed to be shared. So
yeah, so maybe the video will be, because we're gonna have him back where we're gonna share actual videos and maybe some photograph footage. So I don't think we need.
Maybe we don't need video at all.
We don't need the video for this.
So I don't have to send that to History Shift.
Right.
He'll be mad if I don't.
He'll be pretty mad. But yeah, we don't need it. It's totally unnecessary for this show. But we were preparing for it because Kyle.
It'll be better next.
Kyle
show.
and Sebastian have a bunch of stuff to share, specifically about their acoustical investigations while we were in Egypt. But this episode, we just ended up talking about all the ideas around it, and then we went through a great article that Sebastian pulled up by Tom Danley, which you can find the link for in the show notes. And yeah, I mean, it was
I feel really great. I know this is a time travel issue, but like just having that conversation with Sebastian really kind of like brought me back. I was like going over the edge, right? With the whole, I'm just like, nah, resonance, this can't have, I just don't see how it can be.
He's pulled you back.
He's pulled me back into the resonance camp. And I'm like, okay, maybe there is something to this. Yeah, this is really cool. So
yeah, so look forward to that. And meanwhile, I got a couple of things. I meant to do this because agricultural update here. I didn't talk about this. Did I talk about the bees?
No, I forgot to ask you last time too.
Yeah, so we have 4 hives at the vineyard, and that is 4 out of 10 total that we've bought over the years. I don't know.
No, something like that.
Yeah, so we're not great beekeepers, but I basically completely took over the beekeeping a couple of years ago.
We're really good at bee leaving. I mean, because that's what they mostly do.
They have been leaving. Yeah. So, but I've managed to keep 4 hives around for the past 2 years. One of them is older than that, 3 or 4 years.
I guess it would be bee losing.
Bee losing, yeah. Not beekeeping, but bee leaving. Yeah. So, and they're expanding and getting healthy. This year, I left them alone as much as possible, which is great beekeeping advice. But the point is that at the end of the year, when I went out to winterize the hives, which basically means I took out all the summer stuff, which allows them to allows heat to get out of the hive. So a lot of times it's a screen on the top that's covered so that hot air can rise up out of the hive and escape, but still have the bees protected from pests. Instead, you put like insulated boards in there to contain the heat for the winter. So I was winterizing the hives, and that also meant that I was going through the check process and moving things around and checking on their general health. And they all 4 hives looked great. And one of them, I had installed what's called a super onto it. So if you're not a beekeeper, that basically means it's a smaller box above the main hive that has a queen excluder between it and the main hive so that the queen can't climb up there, so she doesn't lay any eggs up there, which means that the bees only put honey up there, which means you can harvest it without getting any brood
or harming the
hive in general. So they had filled the super, and so I felt confident that I could take one of the slats, just one at the outer edge, because bees will start in the middle of the hive and they expand outwards in a spherical shape. So if if they've filled a box all the way to the outside edge, the slats on either end are the last ones that they filled up, right? And so that worked here because the one that I pulled out, the side of the slat that was facing in towards the hive was completely full. The side of the slat that was facing the outside of the box was maybe 2/3 full. So I pulled that one out and did an experiment on extracting the honey from it, and it is fantastic. It's really good. So I was very proud of the bees this year. And so that's my agricultural update. We got a small jar of very dark raw honey from the bees, and
that's awesome.
It tastes amazing.
It's really good.
And I was able to do some experiments on, extraction, and I didn't filter it because you want it to be raw, but it was interesting having to do it because you need it to be warm so that it'll move, the honey will flow. But you don't want to raise it above a certain temperature. Like, I don't want to know how much details I want to go into here, but if you raise it above a certain temperature, it starts to kill things that are in the honey or change the chemical composition. So you have to be very careful not to raise it above a certain temperature, but you still want to get it warm enough to where it can drip
out of there.
Yeah. So it was fun straining the honey out of the wax, and then I ended up with 2 jars, one that had the strained honey. It's not filtered, but strained so that there was no wax in it. And then the other one, I had all the wax remnants that obviously still had plenty of honey in it. You could chew on that. It was really good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So yeah, that's my agricultural update. And so I'm hoping, based on that next year, when spring comes, I'll be able to add a bunch of hive bodies and supers to all the hives, so that they can really strengthen themselves over the spring and summer. And then at the end of the summer, we can actually harvest a bunch of honey, which will be fun.
Yeah. And just generally build them up so that because you can keep adding.
Yes. Keep stacking the hive bodies on there and supers. Yeah. That's right.
So
but yeah, what I've read,
we can make some mead.
Yes. That's right. Yeah. Yeah. What I've read is you want a hive to have 2 main hive bodies before you harvest an entire super off of it, so that they can afford to lose that much work.
Right, and then we supplement their food in the winter.
Yes, right. Yeah, that was the other thing I did when I was winterizing, was I started to feed them.
Yeah.
But all spring and summer this year, I didn't feed them anything. They're close to water, so they have plenty of water, but I wanted them to forage.
Yeah. And then there was a lot of flowers planted around them and all that.
That's right. So the foraging makes the honey really good, and that's what we got.
Cool.
Okay. Yeah.
All right. Well, let's. Are we going to do any emails at all, or
we can do space weather. Let's do. You want to do some space weather news? From spaceweather.com. Let me make sure this is today. Let's see. Yeah, November. Yeah, solar orbiter survives. Oh wait, nope. Here we go. Far side solar activity. A sunspot group on the far side of the sun is exploding a lot. At least 3 CMEs have flown over the southwestern limb this weekend. The source of this activity is probably sunspot complex AR 2898-2900, which rotated off the Earth side of the sun a few days ago. And there was an M-class solar flare earlier today. Earth orbiting satellites detected an M-class solar flare. NASA's Solar Dynamics Observatory recorded this extreme ultraviolet flash. A pulse of radiation from the flare ionized the top of the Earth's atmosphere, causing a minor shortwave radio blackout over the Indian Ocean.
Whoa. Interesting.
Aviators, mariners, and ham radio operators might have noticed strange propagation effects at frequencies below 20 megahertz. This flare was even stronger than it seemed. The blast site was partially eclipsed by the edge of the sun, so only a fraction of the radiation made it to Earth. The instigating far side active region may be capable of X-class explosions. So keep an eye on your solar flare alerts from spaceweather.com. Current conditions, solar wind speed is 465.5 kilometers per second, and the density is 9.6 protons per cubic centimeter. Current sunspot number is 35. The neutron count is 7.6% above the space age average. And the KP index is rated at 3, quiet, for both now and the 24-hour max.
Right on.
There you go.
Still doesn't seem... the sunspot activity is obviously ramping up. I'm seeing kind of...
Yeah.
But there's nothing major yet.
No, nothing major yet.
It might be a decade before it's like...
Could be, yeah.
Really kicking ass.
That's right. That's right. But that's a low neutron count relatively speaking, based on what we've seen on the podcast. 7.6% is, I think, going down, which is interesting because those neutrons are mostly coming from deep space. So the more active the sun is, the more it blocks them, I think, is the idea. So yeah, as the solar activity ramps up, the neutron count should go down, I think. I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we have kind of a long interview. Well, it's almost 2 hours, so we're just going to go straight into that, I guess.
That's right.
All right.
That's what we should
I'll
do.
see you on the other side.
All right.
And we are back, ladies and gentlemen, Brothers of the Serpent podcast, and happy to welcome Sebastian Lonberg, which is the American way to say the name.
Yeah.
And Sebastian was on the trip with us to Egypt, and I guess you've known Ben for a while, right? You met him at a previous trip. Is that true?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't actually too far before. I met Ben in Peru in August.
Oh, okay.
This year.
Wow, I had the impression that you guys were old friends already.
Well, that's, yeah.
Yeah, we really connected, and
Yeah.
we had a but it's weird. Like, before coming there, I had watched everything Ben had posted online on his YouTube channel, and it kind of felt like I knew him, but he didn't know me.
Yeah.
He didn't know me. So,
Yeah.
Right, well, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah.
yeah.
And we wanted to. Sebastian is also a sound engineer, right? You.
That's right.
What do you do? How does that?
Yeah. Give us a bit of your background there for your audio experience.
Yeah. So I work as an in-house sound engineer at the Royal Swedish Opera in Stockholm, and so I work with live sound there, and so that's my day job, and I have also worked a lot with post-production for film, and also video games and
Really? What video games have you done?
Yeah.
Have I played any of them?
Oh, you can. Like it was way back though. It's it's called Chronicles of Riddick Assault on Dark Athena.
All
it's
right.
called.
Cool.
Yeah, it's like one of the few licensed video games that it's actually good. Like usually when they do video games based on movie licenses, it tends to not become so good. But that wasn't good. Yeah.
All right. I'll have to check it out.
Yeah.
Cool.
Vin Diesel.
So yeah, with your audio background and my audio background, naturally, when we were in Egypt, we were like, oh, I'm like singing some note into a box, and then Sebastian is doing the same thing, and then we start discussing like theories about resonance and everything. So that was really cool. So yeah, I guess first off, I wanted to get your general impressions of what you saw in Egypt, and the question of resonance. What do you think this resonance might have to do with all of this stuff? What is important about it?
Well, the first thing is that it seems present in many places. It's hard to pinpoint exactly what the purpose of it is. I get the distinct feeling that in some places, like for example the Great Pyramid inside the big chamber, it felt like the resonance pattern in there was not coincidental. It felt like many things lined up in a way that felt intentional. And in some other places, I felt like in temples, for example, I felt like the acoustics were thought about from kind of like a singing perspective, I have a background I've been a choir singer my entire life. That's also why I had a predisposition to run around and hum in Egypt. It's kind of what I've been, every time I've entered into a tiled bathroom during most of my adult life, I've been like humming. So
Yeah, you got to find that frequency. Yeah.
You got to find that frequency. But there is also, I know from the previous podcast you guys have done recently, you spoke about, for example, cathedrals and how, like, the difference between a cathedral and more of an industrial building.
Yeah.
And I mean, having sung in choirs a lot, I've obviously been singing a lot in churches and stuff, and there is a strength to these experiences you have in spaces that amplify the human voice in a specific way.
Right.
And in some places I felt like I just had the sense that it was intentional, and that the echoing of the room was good for singing. It felt like it carried on the notes in the frequency register of the human voice very well, and
Right.
Yeah.
That's definitely something I think the cathedrals had, which was that they didn't particularly amplify single frequencies. It was more a range, right? And that's important, because you don't want to be having a choir singing along and then one note that they hit just gets amplified like crazy. That's no good.
Yeah.
You need it to have this range and be fairly equal all the way across the whole range. And I did notice that in the pyramids that had the corbelled ceiling blocks, like, in other words, like the room was this wide and then it stepped down and stepped down and stepped down as it went up and got narrower and narrower. It was like a perfect reverb room. Every note had sustain all the way up and through my entire vocal range. It was just like perfect sustain all the way up and down.
But it wasn't overpowering. It was like a good kind of sustain, right?
Yeah, it was beautiful.
It didn't take over the.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I felt that as well.
But in the of course the square rooms with parallel walls and parallel floor and ceiling, there would be certain notes that would just jump out, right?
Yes.
And that's not good for a singing situation.
No, unless you sing one note.
Unless you're singing one. That's a good point.
Yeah.
Good point.
Yeah. The rooms with corbelled ceilings were really interesting in that they seemed to be made in order to have a uniform frequency response.
Right.
In order to, I mean, that's just the technical term for what you said now, is to, like, you want to transmit audio in there with many frequencies, and you want it to transmit without, you want everything to reverberate.
Right.
Not just a single frequency.
Yeah, and not have any single frequencies stand out from all the others. Right, like you said, you want it uniform across the
across
the
the spectrum.
Yeah.
Yep. Like I was talking with Anthony. He was telling me what the frequency response of the King's Chamber in the Great Pyramid was, and it's like 16 hertz.
Yeah.
So it's beneath human, the audible spectrum of human hearing. Definitely beneath any note that I could produce with my voice. So that room, I noticed too, it's so huge too that it seemed to have a pretty uniform reverb.
Yeah.
It didn't act like some of the other square rooms that we were in with parallel walls. And
You're right.
Ceiling.
It was like everything you said
just had
this like amazing echo. But
I found that to be interesting.
Yeah.
There were notes that were more amplified, but it wasn't so noticeable as in the boxes, for example.
And those notes would have been what, like
harmonics.
Harmonics of the lower frequency that it's okay.
Yeah. That room is so special, And exactly what you said there. Anthony was really systematic in he tried to write down certain frequencies, and he started to put together a list of all that, and that's really awesome.
Yes.
To see. I think both of us, Kyle and me, we did recordings and measurements to try to kind of as we were running along, try to keep some kind of measurements that we could look at later and see if we can deduct anything from that.
That's right. Yeah.
It wasn't as good as Anthony's system. I wish I would have written things down. Next time I'm bringing like the little pocket moleskin.
Yeah.
Little notebook.
Little pocket notebook. So I can.
Yeah, that's right.
That's handy. And yeah, Anthony had a little laser measuring tool, and that was.
Did that work for him in the boxes because they're so reflective? Because
in some boxes it did for sure.
Okay. Yeah.
Right.
I would assume that worked. He seemed to be doing things pretty systematically.
But the problem with the laser on a reflective surface is that it reflects, like it bounces back too much. Like you had this problem with the LiDAR.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Yeah. The more well polished surface, the more difficult it was to scan.
Yeah.
Because what LiDAR essentially does is that it transmits like this cloud of tiny laser dots out, and then it bounces back. And if they are reflected too much, nothing gets back. The same happened when I scanned a water surface, and you don't get anything then because everything just bounces in different directions.
Right. Yeah.
That seems counterintuitive, right? You would imagine that the laser hitting the reflective wall would bounce back.
It does. But what the sensor is looking for is not a reflection, but the actual laser light on the surface that you're shining it on.
Oh.
It's looking for that kind of like an echo or not an echo. Like what you don't want is the echoes.
So the measuring tool, I wonder if it works the same way, or if it's actually sensing its own laser reflecting back at it. I don't know.
Well, that's what I'm saying. That would cause a problem.
Yeah.
The more light that gets reflected, the less light is actually
on the surface.
Is actually on the surface that the thing can look at.
I see.
Which is what makes it difficult. Yeah. So with water, you have a reflective surface that's also slightly translucent with a refraction beneath there, and it doesn't work very well for measuring with lasers. If you're trying to,
God dang it, lasers! But
and I mean, even if if you get a good reflection, maybe it's not reflecting in your direction. I mean, if you're like 90 degrees dead on, maybe then you would get some good return there, but it's probably going to look in a different direction when you're scanning like that.
Like, think of shining a laser onto a mirror. What it looks like is the laser is passing through the mirror and hitting the wall behind you if you're just looking at the mirror. You just see a beam of light that goes, that right when it hits the mirror surface, it takes a little turn, and then it's hitting the wall behind you in your field of vision.
Right, yeah.
That's what the device will see.
Gotcha.
Some kind of false room in the reflection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. So Sebastian does have some scans, which we might look at later. And for people listening to this audio, we are recording video because we're probably going to be sharing some stuff. Kyle has some video of audio recordings that he took in some places, and I think Sebastian does as well. So we're going to go through some of those and just we're going to talk about this and some of the interesting things that we found and some of the plans that we have for future trips and the problems we encountered. But the whole thing was cool because I'm not an audio guy. I'm an audio guy in the sense that I have ears and I can hear stuff. But these two guys are, more professional.
And you can tune
I can tune. Yeah, I can tune. And I can sing. I have done that before as well. But yeah, these guys are more professional, and it was cool to sort of watch them go through Egypt with this in mind. And then like they're both toning in rooms and humming and recording things. And then we'd be on the bus and there would be discussions about what does this mean and what did you think about that part and this part. And then of course Ben was also picking their brains, and Yusuf was talking. Yusuf, right? Didn't he bring you in multiple times, asked you your opinion on certain things? because Yusuf,
Yeah, he did.
Yusuf is very keen on the audio parts of the audio features of some of these structures.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I want.
Yeah, and-
oh, go ahead.
No, it was. We had so many good discussions, like in different constellations on this trip. It was like riding the bus of brainstorm all the time.
That's right.
It's you could and you felt totally free to voice any kind of wild idea or theory you had, because you could like bounce it off of everyone without feeling weird. You could like say, what if it was like this?
Yes.
And people would like seriously consider it and like say, okay, well, how about this? And so that was so much fun.
Yeah.
That was one of the big positive things with the trip.
That's
for
right.
me.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. It was a very open-minded is the wrong term, but just like people were willing to consider ideas and to speculate and to to hear a speculative idea and then engage with it rather than just be like,
Yeah.
which is like what you
Exactly.
So yeah, going back to these speculative ideas, I want to know what your thoughts are on. You were getting into the sound resonances in the timples versus into these other structures, and I want to know, what do you think the significance is, say, outside of the places meant for people? Like, in my opinion, these pyramid structures that we went into they're not meant for people.
No.
That's what it seems like. That's the indication I get. I don't know that for a fact, but or maybe inside the boxes, for example. What do you think the significance is of these resonant qualities? Do you think this may play a role in, like, say, Giza power plant idea or some function of a machine type of thing? Like, where do you stand on all this?
Well, I agree with you that when you enter these pyramids, this is not meant to. You're not meant to hang out there. They were obviously sealed, and if people were intended to walk in there and spend time in there, I'm pretty sure it would look different. And the everything has this technical quality to it. I mean, you go down these shafts that are very straight, but they're also made in a proportion that is very uncomfortable to walk if you're a normal-sized human being.
That's right.
Everything seems to have some kind of purpose. Even inside the pyramids, the patterns, the way the shafts go down and up, and then you get to a room, most likely with a corbelled ceiling. There were exceptions to that, but it all seemed like very functional, even though I can't pinpoint what that function is. Well, when we bring acoustics into it, it kind of felt like a lot of these spaces, like my theory, my thought when I was there is that, wow, this is made to transfer sound in different ways. Like the long shafts seemed like they would be able to transmit a sound from one point to the next point in some kind of fashion. Like, purely anecdotal, what me and, for example, Anthony were talking about is that when we were climbing the shafts, we could hear what was going on at the bottom and even at the room past the bottom very clearly.
Yeah.
So at some points it felt like these shafts had a conductive quality to them. And then all the rooms with the corbelled ceilings, as we just said, my initial, I've been, since I'm actually currently in my old studio, it looks like a pile of boxes right now. But when you build a studio, for example, what you're looking for is very specific qualities in a room. For example, you want to minimize parallel surfaces, and you want to like have a very even, controlled shape of echoes within your room. So when I saw the corbelled ceiling, I kind of just got the feeling like, hey, these guys are trying to shape the sound here in some way. My initial reaction was that it was to like having these chorable, like these steps going in like that. I was thinking like, if that's a construction method that was practical to kind of create instead of having a leaning surface like that it would be practical to build like that. You have these indentations instead, so that it could have been like a sloping ceiling, but instead of that, it's jagged like that because of the construction. I don't know, but what both you and me. What we were saying is that we felt that the frequency response was kind of uniform in there. Yes. It didn't really amplify or cancel out any particular frequency. It was kind of like even.
Yep.
So that also speaks the language of like it's trying to transmit the sound in some kind of way.
Do you guys think that that the shapes of these rooms and stuff could be related to frequency, but not necessarily audio? Like, in other words, audio frequency interacting with the shapes of these rooms is a side effect of the fact that they are intended to interact with frequency, but not necessarily audio frequency, like something else in perhaps the electromagnetic spectrum or whatever.
That's kind of where I stand. My issue with the sound aspects of it is because I wonder, what use would that be in terms of energy? I mean, we're not talking about great amounts of energy. And if you do amplify these signals to such an amount that it would provide in some way some kind of...
It becomes destructive.
It's very destructive, right? I mean, you'd be...
Yeah.
Those frequencies are...
I mean, if you create a very strong standing wave versus a strong resonance in a construction, that could be dangerous. You could, if the construction starts self-vibrating, you may collapse the construction pretty much.
Yeah, so, and those wavelengths are like, I mean, they'll induce mechanical vibration. That's
exactly,
when you get up high enough frequency, you're getting into mechanically vibrating smaller and smaller bits of things, right? So the higher you go, like you may go up into a molecular size, like think of a quartz crystal, for example, that they might use for a watch or something. It's so small and it has a frequency that's extremely high.
Yeah.
So if you amplify that frequency, you might shatter that tiny crystal, but you're not going to hurt anything that's large. Right?
No, that's right.
But you get down into these lower frequencies that we were toning at in these rooms, and those, you can break some big stuff with some of those frequencies, Yeah,
if you have enough amplitude, you actually there one of the things that Anthony and me were talking about was an article by a sound engineer called Tom Danley. Have you heard about him?
Sounds familiar for some reason. Yeah. I don't know.
So it's he wrote an article about 20 years ago about he was part of the crew who initially shot the what was the thing with Charlton Heston, the revelation of the Sphinx. So,
yes. Yeah, the mystery of the Sphinx, or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So he was part of that crew, and later on he was contracted by the producer of the same producer who did that production, and they wanted to film in Giza. And so he brought a big PA system into the Great Pyramid with let me see here. I have.
Is that one of the guys we had on with Chris Dunn?
No, that was Robert Walter.
Oh, okay, that's right. You're right.
But he also did acoustic work in the Great Pyramid, I believe.
he brought acoustic measurement devices into the Great Pyramid, and also he brought 2 loudspeakers with good amplifiers. And there's the whole story of how he his power amplifier gets stolen at the airport. He has to order a new one from the Egyptian retailer, and all kinds of stuff. But once he starts doing stuff inside the Great Pyramid, he makes some really interesting observations. And exactly as our friend Anthony said, like 16 hertz, and then multiples of that have a significance in there. So what Tom Danley writes is that once he tried 30 hertz within the pyramid, that's when people started running for the exit, because that triggered that really triggered the room. And 30 hertz that's low, so you'll kind of get like you'll feel it in your gut, really.
Yeah, because like they typical average human hearing is the lowest is 20 hertz.
Yes.
So
yes,
30
exactly.
is just above the threshold.
So you got a tone generator. Can you just give us a 30 hertz blast real quick here? Let's see if Kyle can.
Yeah.
Where did that thing go? He had it pulled up here. Let's see. You can find it. There it is. Yeah, give us a good 30 hertz. 30. Oh, yeah. I can hear that because I'm wearing headphones.
Yeah.
It was way down there. Yeah. If the room started to vibrate in that, yes, you would.
Yeah.
You would.
And imagine hearing that in the room when you feel it in your gut.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, anyone listening, if you're not wearing headphones, you may not even hear that because it was real low. But I've actually felt my headphones hit my ears when he started it. So
yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the cool thing is that this guy also he came to the conclusion that, and this is really interesting. I think he came to the conclusion that you have many kind of resonances. Well, if we take a room, for example, like some basic, like very basic acoustics is that you have something called modes in a room. Yeah. And modes is essentially the points where you like where you get an enhancement of amplitude, or like where you get stronger sounds because the frequency matches the proportions of the room.
Okay.
Right.
So then you can get standing waves between 2 surfaces, but you can also get that's called axial modes, and then you got tangential modes, which is between 4 surfaces. So you may have like 2 walls and floor and ceiling, and then you got like the next level, which is 6 sides. So you get like 2, and then the sound bounces around all these surfaces and creates kind of a standing wave that's kind of running around the room like that. It's a very simplified and that's a very simplified explanation. But nevertheless, what he figured out with his measurements was that he could trace the F sharp. He could trace within the pyramid. That reoccurred many times.
I do recall that.
That's right.
F sharp.
F sharp.
Writing all songs in F sharp from now on.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'd like to see that data. I need to look up the work that he did on that.
Yeah, I can. I have the article.
Yeah, send that over to me.
So, but we have we have accurate measurements of the King's Chamber, for example, in the Great Pyramid. Like that room has been measured pretty accurately. So you could theoretically, right, determine what frequency responses it had based on the measurements. Right. So you could say, okay, here's the length of the room, the long length of the room.
Yeah.
And then you could say, well, the base mode of that, the standing wave should be this frequency because of the length of that room. And then here's the next one that follows the width of it. Here's the one that should follow the height. And then you could also determine the more complex ones you were talking about, where it goes on 4 surfaces or 6. So I imagine the 6 surface standing wave would be a very low, that would be a very, very deep note, right? Because it has to be much longer to do all of that bouncing. Is that right?
I think, okay, I could be wrong about this, but I think that what that means is you have a frequency, like you have a standing wave, the length of the room, you have a standing wave, the width of the room, and you have a standing wave at the height of the room. And if those align properly, you'll get resonance between all those, right? You'll have some kind of harmony between them, meaning that you have modes that match all 3 vertices, right? Is that correct or not?
Well, I would say it's correct. I have to say that in my everyday work, I don't calculate acoustics all the time. So I just want to have that little I just want to say that. But yes, you have all kinds of relations. You have the most simple form of resonances is between 2 surfaces, but then you have all these other ones. However, the ones that have most energy is the ones that are between 2 surfaces.
Okay.
Those are the most energetic. The ones that have to travel more, they're usually lower energy. So when you work with a room, let's say you're doing a studio or a control room for when you do audio work, you're primarily interested in controlling the where the first type of modes happen, because they create the biggest problems, and that's usually within the bass frequency area.
Okay, and so the frequency length would be twice the distance between the 2 surfaces, right? Is that correct?
I think so. Yeah. I originally thought it was like you needed the entire wavelength to be matched between the walls, but Anthony was telling me no, it's only half. Yeah, you only need half. So
half the wave.
You have your pressure side on one side of the room and your rarefied air on the other side, and that's basically half the wavelength.
Right. So you can take the measurements between any 2 flat surfaces, like he's saying, and you just double that, and that's the length. That's the wavelength. That's the length of the wave, and that would give you.
That's your fundamental.
So just to visualize, like sound, if you were to visualize sound, it's kind of like a ripple when you throw a stone in the water. That's kind of like how sound propagates in air. But in order to visualize it and simplify it when we draw it in books and stuff like that, you use a sinus wave. So, sorry, if you have 2 surfaces, a sinus wave like going up and going down, you would be having like 1/2 of that between the surfaces.
Yeah.
So going up there and going down there, so it will like make a circle like that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, and that that's for the fundamental of like the first.
Yeah, and then the harmonics would be where
some multiple of that,
where you can get more than one wave within the shape of the room, and then the reflection also matches or is a perfect match for that,
right?
Basically, so so it's multiples.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, I'm just trying to visualize this for all the audio idiots.
Yeah, so if you
absolutely.
So if you want an octave, you multiply it times 2, right?
Yeah.
Or if you were talking about wavelengths, you're dividing it. Right, you're cutting the wavelength in half, and that gives you an octave higher.
Yeah, you're not cutting the wave in half. The length of it, you're cutting.
The length
half.
of The frequency is doubled.
Right.
Therefore, the wavelength is half the length.
Okay, and so it still fits in the room.
It fits because 2 of them fit inside 1.
Right. Okay.
Of the fundamental.
Yeah. So when we're talking about wavelengths, since maybe some listeners may not know about acoustics, when we're talking about frequency and wavelength, so bigger waves equals lower frequency. Big waves are like bass sounds, and they can be like many feet long. Like one wavelength is very long, and then when you move up higher frequency, they have shorter wavelengths. So for example, a good fact to know is that the human hearing is most sensitive around 2.8 or 3 kilohertz, somewhere around there, because it starts to match up with the diameter of your inner ear, like the ear canal. And so it actually creates resonances within your ear canal. So that's where our hearing is most sensitive.
And what frequency was that? What
2.8 to 3 kilohertz,
yeah,
so 3,000
around there.
Yeah,
it's
3,000.
Like when you get up there.
Huh. Really interesting. All right.
Yeah.
This is well, we're kicking off to a good start
great
here.
start.
We haven't got into our bad data collection yet, but
Yeah.
we're gonna take a quick break.
Yeah, we'll take a break and we'll come back and we'll start playing some great audio for you guys from inside boxes. All right. And we are back, ladies and gentlemen, Brothers of the Serpent podcast, and we are joined by Sebastian, who is you're in Sweden. Where you are?
I am in Sweden, in Stockholm.
In Stockholm.
Yeah.
And like we said before, he was on the Egypt trip with us, and he's an audio engineer. And or what did you say? Front of house? Are you front of house for the?
Yeah. I do all kinds of that, like front of house, back of house.
Okay.
Beneath house, below house.
I love the house.
It's in the house, out of house. I've been very much out of house the last year because COVID has been, like if you're in a performance venue, COVID hasn't really been like the highlight of your career.
That's right.
But so our opera house was pretty much closed for a year. But things are getting back to normal now, which is great.
Oh, that
is good. Yeah.
For a few weeks, I suppose.
Right. That's right. So where were we going? So we were, what you guys?
Well, we're talking about the physics of these resonant chambers and how that works.
Right.
And that's all interesting. I think I still feel like, I still have this question in my mind and Russ had kind of pointed at this, which is this the purpose or is this an effect of the purpose? And I agree that in the temples they seem to be designed for people, and therefore this does have something to do with the audio, especially in the spectrum of our voices. But in these other chambers, I think that maybe we're looking at an effect because of another purpose that's not directly related to the sound. And I think too that if you notice these patterns of resonance in low frequencies, then at extremely high frequencies, they're also going to have these patterns. It's just going to be multiplied over, even up into the light spectrum, right? Chris Dunn pointed out that the air shafts in the King's Chamber could be waveguides. They look like waveguides. Well, in that respect,
in the microwave range, right? Something like that.
Yeah. But I mean, in that respect, every tunnel that's got this clean dressing to the interior is a waveguide. You were describing it as that whatever's going on in the chamber down there, you can hear it way up in this tunnel. Well, that's because it's acting as a waveguide. Now, is that intentional for the frequency that you're hearing it at, or I don't understand enough about designing waveguides, but I would imagine they're designing them for the fundamental, not some harmonic.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that is a difficult thing. I mean, when you get up into radio frequencies, you're in a totally different level. Then you have to kind of substitute the speed of sound for the speed of light, because that's kind of like when you get up that high into like megahertz and terahertz.
That's a good point. So it wouldn't translate because that's a different medium speed.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
But the wavelengths can be long because it's the speed of light, right? Even if it's an extremely high frequency, you have a long wavelength because it's moving at 186,000 whatever miles per second.
Well, I mean, I actually have two. I have the text that I was talking about earlier about this guy Tom Danley. It's a not too long article. We could
Okay. Yeah.
look at that.
Definitely.
He makes some really good observations there. And also, I just as a comment to what you guys just said, it's being mentioned in this article as well, is that one thing that I felt about the pyramid is like it kind of felt like a big organ pipe sometimes, or like a bottle that you blow at. And one thing that he mentions in this article as well is like it feels like the air shafts work as kind of like the hole of the bottle that you blow on.
Yes, I've
now. Why do you build like a huge 2.3 billion stone flute? I don't know about that, but you know,
that's where I get hung up on the sound aspect.
And the problem that the Queen's chamber shafts do not seem to open on the outside anywhere, and they didn't open into the chamber either until recently.
No.
So it's like they're the same kind of shafts, and yet they wouldn't operate as a flute unless there was something else going on. Yeah.
And then there is like, if we're talking really low frequencies, because if you go below 20 hertz, our bodies can still perceive those vibrations. And there have been studies made on that. I have not read them, but our bodies are not oblivious to their presence. So, for example, I
have heard
we should look into that.
Yeah, I've heard that infrasound can cause hallucinations, can cause can scare people. Like there's something that like generates a fear response. Yeah. And when you can't hear the sound, and if it isn't loud enough to where you can feel it, you just get freaked out and you have no idea why.
Yeah. Exactly. And you know, one thing, I mean, if one wild idea I had is that if the pyramid is made for kind of harnessing and amplifying low frequencies, what if they are these giant beacons of kind of like just pulsing well-being to wherever they are? I mean, this is a very spacey idea, obviously, but like, what if audio is the purpose?
Right.
But I mean,
or terror. It's pulsing terror.
Terror.
Yeah.
It's a scarecrow.
Like right. It's just scaring the hell out of all humans. Stay away.
Yeah. And, you know, that brings us to a different thing. I mean, that's all about the purpose of the pyramids, which is all kind of like an underlying theme for what we all are, for the questions we're all posing.
Absolutely.
Kind of like, are they a beacon to warn? Could they be that as well?
Yeah,
I mean,
that's right. Yeah. The overall purpose for these structures is definitely that's
the big question.
That's the big question. So like us, you know, like exploring these features of its interior, is trying to move towards the goal of saying, like, here's what those.
I'm just sharing my screen here.
Okay.
Let's see.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Okay, share screen. Everything seems to disappear here. Let's see where is it? Sorry, guys, I don't find the button.
No problem.
Oh, the share button.
It keeps disappearing on me.
Yeah, there's a bar at the bottom of Zoom that will disappear unless you move your mouse down there. In the main Zoom window.
Okay.
That's going back to the question, what were they for? That's kind of what I'm getting at when I say it's hard to imagine that they were designed for, in some way, that this audio, these audio vibrations, sound vibrations, were part of the function. Now that's not to say that they aren't. It's just hard to imagine why. Like they're at low amplitude, they're not going to get the structure resonating.
Yeah.
Now maybe if there was earthquakes or some type of earth resonance, they might generate these waves that are then guided through the tunnels. Mm-hmm. That's one idea. Now,
Yeah, and the power plant idea, Chris Dunn's power plant idea, is that that the whole thing is it will respond to the basic Schumann resonances of the Earth.
And so that's why you have the Helmholtz resonators that are stepping up the frequency.
Yeah, that's right.
Because you're starting out with this extremely low frequency.
Yeah.
And you're collecting it, focusing it, and then leading it all the way to the Helmholtz resonators, which are stepping it up in increasing stages, going up the grand gallery and eventually ending in the King's Chamber and whatever.
Oh, yeah.
And so
I haven't read the Giza power plant. So is that what he's saying? That
dude, you got to read this book.
It's a fascinating concept. Yeah. And the idea that it's taking the basic Schumann resonances of the Earth. You know, like you can picture the Great Pyramid, and this only works for the Great Pyramid. He's only talking about that structure, not the other ones. You know, the question then would be, well, if the Great Pyramid is for this, then what are these other ones for?
Right, they may be different.
Yeah, but it's basically it takes this basic resonance and engages with it because the pyramid itself is plugged into the plateau. You know, there's actually a mound beneath it that they didn't flatten the plateau in the area where they built the Great Pyramid, so it's like socketed in. Right. And so the pyramid takes those vibrations and then through the grand gallery steps them up to a frequency that would interact with is it hydrogen and microwaves. And it's just
amazing.
Yeah, it's a fascinating concept.
Yeah.
Because a tangent to that is then that when we were in Dendera on the trip, when we were down and saw the the so-called light bulbs that were there. What Yusuf were talking about, that the light bulbs represented the primordial mound, and I didn't really understand what he meant by that, but he was talking about like the primordial mound and how it was kind of reacting with chanting or sound or something like that. Huh. I'll have to look into my videos because I got stuff like that. So what I started thinking about then about the pyramid was like, there is a field called sonochemistry, which is you enhance a chemical reaction by subjugating it to sound.
Yes.
So you as a catalyst or something like that. So my immediate thought was like, hey, what if that's something like, and that seems to run along what Chris Dunn says.
Yeah, yes. I'm all about that.
Yeah, you can use sound to add energy to a chemical process so that the reaction takes place faster or easier, or under different conditions. Yes.
Now, have you ever heard of sonoluminescence?
Yes. Does that mean something glows when it's being excited by sound?
Yeah, they basically take a liquid, you take water or whatever, and you pull a vacuum on it. So you're trying to extract all of the oxygen or gases that are dissolved into it. Right, you get the gases out, and then you take a drop. One way to do it is you have the chamber of liquid between, say, audio transducers or ultrasonic transducers, speakers, essentially, so that you can create a standing wave, right in the center of this bottle of liquid, and you just drop a little droplet of the liquid onto the surface, and it plunges an air bubble down into the liquid momentarily. And then right when that air bubble is down under the surface of the liquid, you hit it with the audio and trap that air bubble in the standing wave, and it collapses the air bubble at the frequency of the sound. So at an ultrasonic frequency, and the collapsing of that air bubble creates such an insane amount of heat in that tiny space that it lights up like a star.
That's amazing.
Like a star viewed from Earth, looking into the sky, like a bright point of light.
Yeah, like think of like.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
That it's so it creates a reaction that is actually so it can be extremely high temperatures. Right.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. And so then they figured another way they did it, which they used a different liquid, like they used, I think, xenon. Or maybe that was the gas.
That's the gas, yeah.
But they just took a cylinder and they had it suspended, and then they drop it. They put the bubble in it, and then they drop the cylinder, and when it impacts, it creates the vibration inside, and just, I mean, they were getting temperatures like, you know, some of the hottest temperatures ever produced, right, on Earth inside the same.
That sounds so interesting, because there seems to be. I mean, I'm a huge fan of the episode you guys did on this Jeffrey Appling.
Oh, yes.
Oh yeah, me too.
Yeah, and his sonic tools. And you know, it's not too far-fetched if there is any solid substance to all of this about sound and acoustics. Like maybe their technology evolved on the line of acoustics.
Yeah.
That their chemistry is tied to acoustics, their mechanics is tied to acoustics. Like if they had power tools, they were using an acoustic process.
Yeah.
I mean, that is a really good point, because I'm really heavily leaning towards the idea of ultrasonic resonance for their cutting of stone and drilling and all of that.
Yep.
And that makes a really good point. It's like, if that's where their technology went for their tools, then maybe these structures also. Yeah, that's man.
Yeah, that is a good point. So you could say it's acoustic based technology.
Yeah.
And so you would see even, you know, side effects of the acoustic base would be in all their structures, you know, and we experience them when we go in there and we're like, well, what is this for? And it is acoustically based, but maybe not necessarily in the way we're using it. But,
right.
Yeah. Exactly. Like they were using it as a primary medium of some kind.
Yeah.
To do stuff. I mean,
Very
it's just
cool.
It feels like it comes back to acoustics in some ways, or sound.
Yeah.
I'm buying it. All right.
And you know, like chemit being like the source of the word chemistry and alchemy and all that stuff. Like, I mean, if we take a little leap, in a philosophical leap here, like it all comes back to kind of like chemistry and sound. It seems like.
Yes.
To me, you know,
I agree with that. Yeah, I agree with that.
So let's see how you guys want to do this. I have an article here written by a sound engineer. That's really interesting. Would you like me to read?
Absolutely.
Or
Sure.
would you like to read?
Go for it.
All right. So this is an article written by Tom Danley. It was written 20 years ago. And I'll just read from the top. So it's a saga of test tones, Indiana Jones, The Lost Knowledge
Of course.
Nice timing there. Nice timing. Okay, so tell me if my pronunciation is unclear or something. I am Swedish after all, so but you know. So for some 20 years, I worked for Intersonics, a company that developed experimental spaceflight hardware for sounding rockets and the space shuttle, and we also did contract R&D. It was while there, the boss let me launch the server drive part of the company. The caveat was as long as all it costs was space and lights. So we were off in our spare time to create some perfect bass. With so much of the company's NASA work having to do with acoustics and having good measurements, we were also one of the early companies to get a TEF machine. So that's a machine that measures frequency and vibrations. You can look up TEF, a TEF machine. It's an abbreviation. That's
right.
Good to know.
I'll look it up.
TEF.
Yeah.
For those of you
TEF.
listening. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, I'll look it up. Keep going.
Well, okay. So I used a TEF to measure vibration resonances in space flight payloads and locate flaws in concrete blocks, looking for echoes. So it was like testing materials for how they would vibrate so that they would not like shake into pieces in a space shuttle and stuff like that. So he was doing this as pretty much the highest level you can. Another task set was to develop new transducers for acoustic levitation. Now this is interesting. Another for producing a sonic boom. I even used TEF for measuring resonant modes on pecan shells. So he was measuring like the resonance in pecan shells.
So it says TEF stands for time, energy, and frequency analysis. That's what it is.
Yes,
so TEF
exactly.
is time, energy, and frequency, and the machines are for analysis using those those three. Okay.
Exactly.
Cool.
So While at Intersonics, a movie company asked to film the acoustic levitation process used by our spaceflight hardware. I ended up demonstrating it and being in the movie Mystery of the Sphinx with Charlton Heston.
All right.
During filming, I had made a wisecrack to the producer about going to Egypt and measuring the pyramids. Several years later, the same producer calls up out of the blue and asks if I was interested in finding out why the inside of the Great Pyramid sounded so weird. This would be for another movie, all expenses paid and a decent nut to boot.
God, lucky guy. Dang it.
I mean, that's like the dream.
That is
okay.
the dream.
Yeah. Okay, I'll go on.
Yeah.
So some quick research on the pyramid revealed it was a lot bigger than I imagined. It had a number of chambers and levels above the king's chamber, opening the possibility that it was not a simple acoustic system. A rough, and I mean rough, estimation of the resonance of the granite ceiling beams in the king's chamber put them at about 300 hertz. So he did that, like that was math he did before he even entered the chamber.
Okay.
A somewhat less rough Helmholtz resonator and transmission line model suggested resonances starting at 2.5 hertz or so. So he would make calculations based on the dimensions of the beams above the
But yeah,
above the
that make up the
great
ceiling of the king's chamber. Yeah.
Yeah, and he would have some kind of idea before he even went there. So that's really interesting. Is in that like the first thing he thinks is that, oh, the relieving chambers, that must be Helmholtz resonators.
Yeah.
Wow.
Interesting. Yeah.
And I mean, we have to keep in mind, like in the example with Chris Dunn, he mentions Helmholtz resonators as isolating a certain frequency and just filtering that out. But Helmholtz resonators are also used as what we call bass traps in studios. So it's kind of like having you have an enclosed space with a tiny slit in it, and this slit lets a bass frequency go through and kind of like sucks it up. So a Helmholtz resonator can also work as that. So I think in this case, he's referring to the relieving chambers as something to kind of like absorb
it. Yeah, absorb it. Wow.
Bass frequency.
Wow.
Okay, so I'll continue. My long, fairly comfortable flight on Egypt Air from New York landed in Cairo, where my Egyptian adventure got off to a bad start. Well, we know something about that.
Yeah.
My start wasn't bad, but we had people on the tour.
That's right.
So not being sure what to expect or if my modeling meant anything in the real world, I'd packed 2 speaker systems for producing test tones, one for above 100 hertz and a second much larger unit for below. Both were shipped in sealed boxes containing a power amplifier, my trusty TEF-12, a B&K microphone, those are great, and an accelerometer and a brace of cables. Unfortunately, my power amplifier got lost. When we arrived at the Cairo airport, I suppose they thought the elaborate tour they took me on through the dark, dank caverns under the airport looking for it would offset the loss. Maybe they...
Sorry, keep going.
hoped this search party experience would combine with relentless jet lag to dissuade my pursuit. Well, come to think of it, they never did pay up on the insurance claim. Grumble, grumble. I was immediately on the phone to the Crown dealer. Crown is a speaker manufacturer in Heliopolis to arrange for the indigenous amp rental. Thankfully, several days of free time were scheduled before I was on camera. My 1:30 trip from the Cairo airport to Giza, where the pyramids are, documented the chaos of local Egyptian road rules. Yeah. Car horns are like lingua franca for inter-driver communication. Headlights are almost never used at night on highways, but are frequently flashed in a fashion similar to horn honking.
Yep.
We had some of that.
Yep, lots of that. They talked to each other with their horns. It was great.
Yeah, and there was the occasional donkey next to your car.
That's right.
Stuff like that. Also curious, a marked 3-lane road can often have 5 lanes of door-to-door, bumper-to-bumper traffic, consisting of a zillion wannabe Formula One drivers in beat-up cars. This routine requires constant lane changing, horn honking, and jockeying for the pole position at all at 15 to 30 miles per hour. During a return to Cairo proper, I discovered that even the traffic lights are different. Like everywhere else, green means go, but yellow also means go, and red means go if nobody's coming. A cop standing directly in front of your car means stop. But if you are in the car next to the one with the cop, you can go regardless of his hand motions and how hard he blows his whistle.
That's right. And he nails the traffic situation. That's great.
He had the experience.
Yeah.
So I settled in at the Mövenpick Hotel near the pyramids. Several days of pre-film preparation remained. It was immediately clear that many production details remained undefined. When I asked whether or not we had any sort of production schedule, outline, or anything, the answer was, "It isn't ready yet. Don't worry." I thought that maybe that was the way Hollywood is, real casual. So I made my best attempt to go with the flow. The first day, we went to look around the Great Pyramid and the area where we needed to get inside. This thing is huge. It's 500 feet across and 480 feet high, and made of about 2.5 million blocks of limestone with interior constructed of red granite. We are all very well aware of that, yes. So to enter the Great Pyramid, one must first enter the cave El Mamoun. A would-be robber bored into the limestone here in around 680. The tunnel goes in approximately 50 feet to a point where they were supposedly about to give up, but heard a noise inside and redirected the tunnel to the left.
Yeah.
Have you guys heard about that?
We have. Yes, we've gone over that, and after being there, we're less convinced that that's that is the story, but I don't know. We've
done quite a bit of analysis on this on the show.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's more to come. There's more to come.
That's
even.
right.
Anyways, he's done his presentation there. So we're getting into the audio stuff here.
Yeah.
So, so there they hit the red granite casing on one of the interior passages, and by following it, the tools they had couldn't cut granite. They eventually located the Great Pyramid's interior. From the end of this tunnel, one climbs about 120 feet, stooped over in a space barely 1 yard high. This section is fairly steep with an approximate 30-degree incline. Without the wooden boards fastened to the stone for footing, it would be almost impossible to make this climb while carrying the gear. Next, you enter the Grand Hall. He's referring to the King's Chamber, I suppose.
Or
I think Grand Gallery.
I think.
Oh, Grand Gallery.
Yeah.
Okay,
The
Grand Gallery.
Corbelled ceiling.
Vaulted. That's right. It's also inclined, but now about 40 feet tall with a corbelled ceiling. After trudging up another 120 feet up the Grand Hall, one finally reaches the entry to the King's Chamber, which is another tunnel. This time, however, it's level and about 10 square feet and perhaps 20 feet long. So he's very particular with his measurements here. Like, he gives precise measurements of everywhere he is, which is kind of cool in this article. And I'll just skip ahead a little bit because he mentions all the dimensions of the King's Chamber and that you can't see a credit card between the seams, all that familiar. However, it was kind of a pain just to get this far, and this was the easy part. When I expressed concern about getting the gear up to the King's Chamber, I was encouraged to hear the producer's plan to hire some locals to haul our gear in and out. He acknowledged the degree of difficulty, and he was right. The producer was also right about the acoustics in the King's Chamber. It sounded very weird inside there. Think of the livest room you've ever experienced, and then double that. It was acoustically solid as a rock, given minimum of 200 feet of stone in all directions, it should be. So I think he's referring to like the surface area around him. Yeah. So our crew had a heavy heap of equipment, larger than my gear pile. So our fearless leader decided we would go to a wood shop and have a skid made that we dragged up the incline. After measuring the passages, we were off the next day to find a wood shop known to the staff's hired Egyptian cab driver. I love how this goes. Like, they ask the cab driver, and we need a slide. So, okay, so he goes. Do you want me to go through how he transports all of this into the pyramid, or should we jump ahead?
No, let's get to where he's doing the experiments. But yeah, so they go to the shop. Let's see. They plan A includes production goals. They were looking for the cavity. Then the plan B was to produce a TV documentary. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So, okay, so what jumps out here is that they had a lot of permissions. They were kind of like discussing, we can drill a hole here. We can do, they felt pretty free.
Yeah. Well, he says that. Yeah. Okay. So we're talking about the Sphinx area. He says there were no other ways of reaching the cavity beneath the Sphinx, and the permit to drill a hole for a fiber optic camera had been mysteriously yanked by the Ancient Department.
Yeah, so being problem solvers, the bosses decided to look for another way to reach the Sphinx cavity.
Yeah.
So they were apparently like down in the Sphinx. I think they even went to the Osiris shaft because he mentions a well later on, unless there's another well on the Giza Plateau.
Well, there's quite a few, but they're not all excavated.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Okay, so that's what comes next here. So the producer lived in Egypt part-time and had heard about a water well on the causeway. The causeway, by the way, is the big stone ramp used to hold stones up from the Nile for the pyramid. One enters from the side through a short tunnel into the side of the actual roadway.
That's got to be the Osiris
That does sound
shaft.
like the Osiris shaft, yeah.
Yeah. From here, you carefully climb over an iron gate and try not to fall into the 30 feet deep hole immediately on the other side. Then you carefully descend a decrepit iron ladder down into the dark.
Yeah.
The bottom opens up into a room about 20 by 20 feet. At the far side is a down shaft about 6 by 6 feet or so. You carefully get on another iron ladder, looks to be like 3/8 of an inch round rusty steel bar, and climb down into the blackness about 60 feet. This was spooky. All we had for light was a helmet-mounted flashlight. So it's kind of interesting.
Then he gets into the room with the 3 boxes. Yep.
Yeah, this climb ends by opening into 2 with 3 sarcophagi. All had been robbed, he says.
Yeah. Okay, so they're doing all that waiting for the wooden skids to be done to get the stuff up into the pyramid. I see.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what he says. Yeah. Okay.
So there's a big part of here about how he talks about what I think is the Osiris shaft.
Yeah.
So let's jump ahead to where he gets. So the lighting guy tapped into the AC mains and set up his transformer, and we were ready. I picked a spot on the wall in the king's chamber to set up my stuff. I placed the source at one wall and the microphone on the opposite wall and was ready to go. And this is where it gets interesting. I had figured so he uses a lot of like industry lingo here. So I had figured the use of a known sealed box woofer whose roll-off slope would roughly complement room gain slope that would allow useful measurements to extremely low frequencies. The producer wanted to get the sound on film clearly. He asked that I test it as loud a level as practical. I applied the first low sweep starting at 200 hertz to 10 hertz. So we swept from 200 hertz down to 10 hertz, a comfortable level. Around 90 hertz, I observed a strong room mode, and sweeping at 1.1 hertz per second, some real energy was transferred. What really made everyone get up and run to the X moment, I aborted that test.
Hold on.
This was a good response.
Wait a second. Wait a second. Go back because we lost you there for a second. Start with what really made everyone get up and run. Go from there.
All right. What really made everyone get up and run to the exit was the resonance near 30 hertz. At that moment, I aborted that test. This was a good resonance. It got nice and strong and scared the wits out of several crew members. Frankly, I was a little concerned myself. High Q resonances at low frequencies can be very exciting. So here's the real nerd joy coming out.
So a high Q means it's a very, very isolated frequency.
Yes, very narrow.
Very narrow frequency.
So you can peel it out from all the adjacent frequencies.
Yeah.
The chances of something bad happening are small, but the consequences are large. not wanting to be known as the first person in modern times to be buried in the pyramid, I moved the TEF and moved to the tunnel entryway instead of inside the king's chamber.
Okay, yeah, he was afraid the chamber might come down on him.
Yeah, so that's pretty wild.
Yeah.
Like, he did this test. And I spent several nights taking measurements there and was filmed without incident. I observed a good distribution of room modes, and curiously, the red granite sarcophagus displayed several resonant modes, which directly corresponded to these room modes.
Damn, that's what God.
Yeah.
So he says he got a good around 90 hertz. He observed a strong room mode. Can you play 90 hertz for us real quick?
We'll do 90 hertz.
Yeah, let's hear
go
90.
Here. Switch again.
30, 60, 80, 90.
Here we go.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, that's 90 hertz. Probably still need to be wearing headphones to hear that.
Yeah.
For most people.
Yeah. So he continues, lying in the sarcophagus, one finds it's nearly impossible to hum any note other than the ones related to the main resonances. In that position, when you do hum at the right frequency, it's easy to make it seem very loud. But for someone standing next to you, it's not loud at all. Also, lying in it, the outside sounds that get coupled throughout colors other people's voices for a very Darth Vader effect.
Wow, I didn't notice that. But when I was in the box, I was making noise, so.
And no one else was making noise, right?
No, there were people outside.
Oh, okay. All right.
I honestly didn't notice that as well, but I was too happy making those resonances.
That's what I mean, yeah. I was focused on the noises inside the box.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he continues, my general observation is that the pyramid's dimensions, the pyramid's construction materials, and the box inside the king's chamber were designed to passively, as in zero electricity, enhance whatever sounds were present inside the chamber.
So that's what I want to know. Is this restricted to sound? Or could this also happen in the electromagnetic spectrum?
Well,
Because
maybe
it's geometry, right? It's geometry that matters here.
And reflection, right? So you've got to have
Yes,
because some granite is transparent to some
certain frequencies.
Frequencies of the electromagnetic spectrum. So it would need to be the right frequencies for it to be to do the same thing here.
To be reflective.
Yeah.
Okay, continue.
Yeah, that's really. But my immediate thought is, instead of going up, like going down, that whatever it's harnessing is kind of like lower frequencies. Like, for example, the Schumann resonance. If it's coupled into the bedrock, it would be like directly. It would be like a bell being hit by the bedrock, pretty much.
Yeah.
Yes.
But the problem is that harmonics only go one direction. Like they only go higher. In other words, you can't get once you get to the fundamental resonant frequency of any chamber, you can't get a frequency response for a harmonic that's lower than that frequency.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing here's just a thought experiment. So when we talked in Egypt about all the different boxes, we were talking about that at some places we triggered resonances that were very close in pitch.
That's right. Yeah.
Like they were really close in pitch, creating kind of like a vibration between the pitches.
A dissonance, a beat.
So,
a beat. Yeah.
A beat. So the beat is a frequency.
That's right.
So let's say you trigger two frequencies really close to each other and you have the beat, and the beat is actually a lower frequency.
That's right. You're right about that.
But if your radio waves have very long wavelengths, because again, remember that you're working at the speed of light.
Yeah,
so the
that's
wavelength is very long.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you're talking about going down in frequency, if you're doing that because you're wanting longer wavelengths, well, radio waves can be kilometers in length, a single wave. So
because it's traveling so fast.
Yeah. So you can get extremely long wavelengths in the electromagnetic spectrum.
That's really how you have to talk about this is wavelength as opposed to frequency, because frequency in what medium, right?
Yeah.
If you filled the pyramid with water, then you'd be talking about a different frequency of resonance, because the sound is traveling faster in the water. And then if you filled the chambers with gas, if you change the density of the air in any of the chambers, now you're talking about different frequencies. So it's all about wavelengths.
Yeah, so I just pulled up this right here. It says radio waves have the longest wavelengths in the electromagnetic spectrum. They range from 10 centimeters to 10,000 kilometers in length. Yeah, so you can really get long wavelengths with radio waves. So it is possible, if we're just talking about wavelength itself, to have this interact in the light spectrum, as long as the wavelengths match. So I think that's part of
in that case, would it be like a receiver? Would the pyramid receive or transmit?
Well, I think right now we're talking about amplification of some kind. I don't know. Yeah, it really depends.
And he's in the article here, he's talking about sort of a harmony between the box inside the room and the room itself.
Yeah.
That harmony would exist in other mediums as long as the wavelengths are the same.
The same, yeah.
So that's all I think
the frequency would be different if you're using a different medium like light. But as long as the wavelength matches, then you would have the same effects as long as the materials, like the granite, isn't transparent to that particular...
Right. If it had the same reflectivity.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's, what if it's, I get the feeling like maybe we're talking about wavelengths, frequencies, and different mediums. Like sometimes I get to think about like it is that transducer between mediums, like you go from air or a substance into rock. And
yes,
could it be related to that?
Yeah, transducer is a possibility as well.
And the possibility that it's a transducer between the earth resonances, natural resonances coming from the earth to something in the electromagnetic spectrum.
Right.
And that's what Chris Dunn was kind of
So you have that, in that case, it's a transducer between like basically a mechanical vibration.
Right.
Into the electromagnetic spectrum.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And like a mechanical vibration into acoustical energy as well, and or possibly electromagnetic.
And see, if I think this is an interesting idea, because this would explain why it has such an enormous core of, like this is why you need all these, you need 2.5 million blocks or whatever, because you're trying to contain an enormous, very powerful mechanical vibration, because you're trying to transduce it into something else that you can use in a different way. So yes, you want the structure to have an enormous amount of inertia so that it doesn't get destroyed, and even then, and we need to take a break here in a second, but we're talking, he was talking about, Danley was talking about how he was measuring the beams across the King's chamber. Kyle was talking about how if you get very powerful acoustical vibrations going in a chamber, they can be very destructive. Well, some of those ceiling beams are broken. So something extremely destructive did happen in that chamber, right?
Yeah. I'm thinking about like whatever caused. Is it true? I heard from other people that the chamber is actually widened a little bit.
Yes, that's true.
Like as if from some kind of explosion or something.
Yeah, something happened in that chamber that was,
or a vibration that shook it apart.
Yeah.
Somehow.
I'm like, let's say that this was a focal point for Earth vibrations, and there was a major earthquake. Like it would have been like so oversaturated this system. What if that is somewhere along the lines? I don't know.
Yes, that's a possibility as well.
That's good stuff.
Yep.
Or like an airburst from a comet.
Oh man. Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
He's just dragging in the younger drive.
Bring in the younger drive. All right, well, we got to take a break. We'll come back and read more of this article. It's great stuff.
This is great.
Yes.
Cool.
are back, ladies and gentlemen. I think this is going to be the final segment of this show, and we're going to continue on here. Sebastian's reading the article by Danley. What's his first name?
Tom
Danley. Yeah, great stuff.
All right. Okay, I'll pick up where we left off.
Yeah.
So he said, like the last thing he said is, my general observation is that the pyramid's dimensions, the pyramid's construction materials, and the box inside the king's chamber were designed to passively, as in zero electricity, enhance whatever sounds were present inside the chamber. It also appears that any wind pressure across the pyramid's internal air shafts, especially when it was new and smooth, was like blowing across the neck of a Coke bottle. This wind pressure created an infrasound harmonic vibration in the chamber at precisely 16 hertz.
Now, how does he know that? Just by the math that he worked out, probably?
Well, he spent many nights in there, he said. So, I don't know.
Yeah.
What does he base that on? I don't know. I'll continue. Being a musician myself, I was especially interested to discover a patterned musical signature to those resonances that formed an F-sharp chord. Ancient Egyptian texts indicate that this F-sharp was the resonant harmonic center of planet Earth. F-sharp is, coincidentally, the tuning reference for the sacred flutes of many Native American shamans.
Wow.
What about that?
Yeah.
Wow. That's cool.
I have no knowledge about Native American shamans, but
I don't either.
But we are on this podcast no longer surprised by interesting cultural connections that cross the planet and time. So it's fascinating stuff
exactly.
right there. Yeah.
So bottom line, we have 2.5 million blocks piled up in Egypt. Halfway around the world, you have a guy whittling a tree into a musical instrument with exactly the same F-sharp resonance.
That's a great way to put it.
It is, yeah.
How did they do that? The producer and crew were hot to film me placing an accelerometer on the big red granite beams which make up the roof of the king's chamber. Each of these beams weighs up to 90 tons, and they were quarried at Aswan, some 600 miles away. They are also about 150 feet high inside the pyramid. Another how did they do that question. To reach the upper levels above the king's chamber, one re-enters the grand hallway, then climbs 40 feet up an old extension ladder to a hole in a wall. A small bundle of knotted cords comes out of the hole, which is also the entrance to a small tunnel. Once in the tunnel, you make a right turn and crawl a little more to an enlarged area carved out around a red granite wall with a hole in it. Climbing through that opening, you come into the chamber directly above the king's chamber. This room is only about 4 feet tall, but is the same length and width as the king's chamber. The ceiling is flat and is covered with some very old graffiti. We've heard about that graffiti.
Yeah, and so I just want to point out real quick before you go on here that this one of the most fascinating things about these, quote unquote, relieving chambers above the king's chamber, all of them have this feature, is that it's the bottoms of the beams that are flat, not the tops, right? So what he's saying there is you come in and the tops of the beams that make up the ceiling of the king's chamber are all different sizes, and they're not flattened into a floor. But when you look above you, the ceiling, which is composed of another set of beams, they're flat. And if you get on top of those, they also are all different shapes and sizes on the top part of them. And the ceiling of the next set of beams is flattened. So that I find that to be a very interesting feature. Now clearly those chambers were never meant to be entered. That whole area was completely closed off to the rest of the pyramid until people dug holes through things to get there. But that should give you a clue as to function in a sense. They're flattening the what are the bottoms of the beams, but not the tops. Even though in some places you can see weird scoop marks on the tops of some of the beams, like whoever was putting them in there was, I think that it was speculated that they were tuning them by, carving material off of some of them, and kind of you're removing material until you get it the right frequency that you want, or the right mass, or whatever. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's fascinating. How it's. I mean, what difference does it make that one side is flat and one side is
Irregular,
uneven?
Yeah.
If you don't see it, does it have a transmissive quality to it, like that one side is flat, or I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. And it's like if you're thinking, well, you flatten the bottoms because that's what they're sitting on the bottom. Well, you only need to flatten the edges that are sitting against the whatever the supporting beams are. You don't have to flatten it all the way across the bottom, and yet they are. They're all made so that they're very flat across the entire length of the beam, not just where it sits on the beams that are the uprights that are supporting the whole structure. So, yeah.
I kind of get the vision of an upside down marimba, like, because they're resting on how are they placed?
They're resting on the ends.
Yeah, the ends. Yeah. You're right. Like a bar on a marimba or whatever that you could hit that would tone is supported at either end.
Well, they're not quite.
Not
there's
all the way at
overhang.
the end.
Yeah, there's an overhang.
It overhangs. Yeah, that's right. But yeah.
Anyway, that was just like an image I got in my head there. I'll continue the text.
Yeah.
So, yep. Yeah, cool. Well, let's see where we were here. Okay. The floor in this first chamber above the king's chamber consists of big rounded bulges, which are the center beams that run the width of the room. It took some time to haul all the camera and lighting stuff up, set up, then blow all the dust out of this sensitive gear before preparing to roll. And he continues, after filming at that level and climbing up through a tunnel, we got to the next level up to do the same filming a bit. It was in this room that we found a huge pile of burlap sacks filled with the chips the diggers had removed from the level below. Mm. The room also featured a large trash pile and hundreds of water bottles from the diggers. It's clear they were at work here for some time. And this was in the year 2000, I think.
Yeah.
I remember this.
Yeah. People were asking, like,
Chris
what
Dunn's
were they
book.
digging? Yeah, right. Exactly.
Yeah, what were they digging?
Yeah.
So our passage to the rest of the upper level was a real pain. Whoever did this part of the work used explosives. Essentially, this turns the experience into rock climbing. I got as far as I was able to go without help. Fortunately, the camera and lighting guys were climbers and helped me up the last step. The top level has a peaked ceiling. There, I had some time to look into any and all cracks I could find with my headlamp. I found a place which looked like it opened up into a room, as I could not see anything past the edge I was peering in. That's interesting.
Yeah.
On the next trip up, the camera guy put a 40 feet fiber optic bundle into the crack to see what it was. It turned out to be a very long, couldn't see the end, row of blocks all aligned instead of the normal stagger pattern, all aligned together, all with big parts of the lower corner broken off. What does that mean?
That's what made the crack that they could look through. All the blocks that were lined up instead of staggered all had parts of their lower corners broken off, which made this basically a hole through the wall. Strange.
As a consequence of the explosions?
Possibly, yeah. It's some kind of damage. And it's weird, like, you have to wonder what structural reason for this, not staggering all these blocks so deep that it goes 40 feet into the core.
Definitely on purpose. That's all I can say.
They do it on purpose. There's always a reason.
Yeah. While the accelerometer footage was good for the movie, the measurements were not informative. The signal was totally swamped by 50 hertz and other electrical noise. I had a DAT recorder, like a digital audio recorder, on hand, recording the test and mic signal for later analysis. After being home for a few months and trying to see what else might be revealed on the tape using hyperception software, must be some old software, I found several things I couldn't have seen with the TEF. The TEF showed a large number of room modes, some going below 20 hertz. While doing an FFT, on the between sweep time or quiet parts of the recording. So an FFT is just a spectrum analyze. He's checking what frequencies are in here and do I see any ones that jump out from the others. So while doing an FFT on the between sweep time or quiet parts of the recording, I found some very low frequency sound resonances, which start at a few hertz and go upward to 15 or 20 hertz or so. At least some of these were the same low frequency resonances I excited with my sweep when he played with the loudspeaker.
Yeah.
But not all of them. This sound was present even if everyone is silent.
So it's a continuous.
That's freaking
There's
cool.
a continuous
Hum.
super low LF,
Yeah.
super LF frequency in there.
Yeah.
All the time. Wow.
Yeah, all the time.
It's singing
And
at
then-
us.
I think that's so cool. And he says, I crunched the results of the measurements and they were sent on to a musicologist that was part of the staff. As mentioned, he identified that there was a pattern of frequencies which roughly formed an F-sharp chord.
Oh, God.
What?
That's weird.
Not all the resonances fell in the right place. Some repeated the pattern for many octaves. In other words, it was roughly tuned to F-sharp over many octaves. So it's been suggested by others that the Great Pyramid is not a tomb at all, but actually a temple of sorts, and that these resonant frequencies were designed into the structure. While many exotic and often far-fetched properties have been ascribed to the power of the pyramid, I see a possible argument that some of the phenomena people experience in it may be caused by the acoustical properties that were measured. The effects of low-frequency sound were extensively studied by various government agencies to determine the effects on humans, partly for the space program. One of the things that was discovered is that infrasound, very low frequencies, can affect one's brainwave activity, alpha rhythms, etc., and other biological functions. If, as some suggest, these pyramids were constructed as a temple or for an initiation ritual rather than a tomb, then the low-frequency sounds may be deliberate and have served a scared purpose.
Sacred, I think is probably what he means.
It's a typo.
Of course, sacred purpose, with the sound triggering and even forcing changes in brainwave state.
But scared might
As
also
in-
be the right word.
Yeah, could be scared too.
If it's a typo, it works. Because
It works. That's fine. You never know, like when you're not, like when English is not your first language and you see something like that doesn't make sense, you kind of like, maybe it does make sense, but I don't understand it. So you just keep reading.
It's both.
So he goes on to say, one of the latest rages in controlling one's brainwave state are the light and sound machines, which use black glasses and headphones with flashing lights in the glasses and low-frequency pulsing sounds in the headphones to literally trap your brain into synchronizing at the pre-programmed frequency. It would seem like sort of a meditation ride. You need no practice to do it. It just takes you. The frequency range, which causes this effect, is at the low end of the audio spectrum or even below the low frequency that we hear, infrasound. Low-pitched sounds have long been known to cause emotional responses. The massive pipe organs of the ancient cathedrals were built at considerable difficulty, one should remember, to produce powerful low-frequency sounds to frequencies below audibility or infrasound because of the powerful emotional and physiological effects they have on people. Music and movie soundtracks are reproduced loudly to have an emotional effect on most people. Before the Industrial Revolution, I personally think this is a very good point. Before the Industrial Revolution and the attendant noise pollution, humans had more sensitive hearing than we do now. Accordingly to the ancients, the sound in the pyramids would seem even more powerful. I just think that's a good point because me being a sound engineer has its root in me being sensitive to sounds. I'm kind of like the sound sensitive kid who's like, that's loud. I'll I'll go to another place when I was small.
Yeah.
So, but we live in a world that has a lot of noise pollution. So one of the big luxuries you can have is being out in nature and actually going to such a remote place where it is quiet. You don't even hear a car in the distance.
Yeah.
And then you hear your ears ringing, which means you've been deafened.
Yeah.
In some respect.
Yeah.
By,
That's right.
By the incredible loud noises all around you all the time. I've noticed that.
But if these guys were using giant, ultrasonic cutting tools, they were making loud noises.
Oh yeah.
To build these pyramids, that's the next question. Is like, the ancients being more sensitive to sound. It depends on where these ancients did they not have technology, and if their technology was all based on acoustics, it's possible that some of them.
Well, I can tell you this: if you were hammering with on chisels all day long, you're going to destroy a certain part of your. Yeah,
I wouldn't be there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right.
Yeah. I mean, and you have to think about that as well. Like, a lot of sound engineers are really into this thing that, sound is polluted in many places. People, I mean, with someone, if someone shines a flashlight in your eyes, you're bound to react. But when it comes to like sound, it's not really the same thing. Like you can have, I mean, obviously you react, but maybe you get what I mean.
Yes.
People are more ready to live through like annoying sounds than they are light, for example.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so you can have like a construction going on across the street, and there's all this noise.
Or just traffic noise.
Or traffic or whatever. Yeah, but if somebody turns on a flashlight and shines it right in your eyes, you're like, hey, man,
Yeah, I'm actually extremely annoyed by the traffic noise on my nearby road. It's actually not close. Like normal people's houses would be right next to the road, but our road, it's a country road, but I don't know how far away it is. But I hear the traffic on it. I can't see it or anything, but I hear the cars.
Oh yeah.
And when I go out at night and I'm trying to like just look at the stars and the engine noises and the traffic on that road, I'm just like, God, it's constant.
Yeah.
I wish it would stop. It makes me want to move farther away from any freaking roads.
Oh, I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah,
and I live in the center of an urban area.
Oh yeah,
yeah. That's what I mean.
Then you spend, you take a weekend and you go out into the middle of nowhere and you climb a mountain and you're laying up there and it's totally silent, and then a jet
I know
flies across the sky.
Yeah, I know.
You can't get away from it.
It's like it really affects your concentration. I mean, when I've worked on different jobs and you sit in an open office landscape. Then you can get really tired, and that's because your brain works so hard to filter out what do I need to hear. Like if you hear someone talking, you have to decide. Your brain has to decide: is that relevant info, or should I just block it out? And that's kind of like a process. If you view your brain as a computer, it's kind of like it takes CPU time to do that.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, for sure. So if there's all these noises coming in, and you're trying to work and focus and concentrate, and your brain is having to constantly filter out all this stuff that isn't necessarily relevant, but also at the same time pay enough attention to pick up something that is relevant.
Yeah.
Then that can make you tired. I can see that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we're almost done with the article.
Yeah.
Let's keep going.
Let's.
All right. Okay. So apparently, man has been intentionally designing acoustic spaces for quite some time. During 1996, a Journal of the Acoustical Society of America paper, authored by Paul Devereaux and Robert John, detailed a number of ancient structures in England and Ireland, which were apparently designed to enhance the bass frequencies in the voice range. Among other conclusions, Devereaux and John believed this was done because of group chanting used in the rituals. Mantras were often part of the meditation process and are even now. The dimensions of the sarcophagus in the main chamber are also such that there's acoustical reinforcement of the low frequency voice range as well. As such, it seems obvious that the architectural acoustics are simultaneously very old and yet a virtually new science. The ancients had a grip on these principles, yet acoustic sciences seemed nearly lost for thousands of years. We ask why, yet we have no answer. In many cases, architectural designs made more than 100 years before the computer are still considered to be among the best there are. This is further evidence, it seems, of how cyber analysis can never fully replace life experience. Still, these days, architectural acoustics exist almost entirely within the computer. I think I understand what he means. He means that before we had computers, people were able to design with acoustics in mind on a very high level.
Yeah.
And today, when we create a room for the sake of acoustics, we almost always do a computer simulation of it beforehand.
Right.
So what he means to say is that we could do this without computers.
Yeah, that's right.
So, and the end here. So, lacking a time machine, one cannot know what the designers really had in mind when they built the Egyptian pyramids. Clearly, they went to an amazing amount of work and had a powerful reason for doing it. Equally clear, they had techniques and skills used in its construction that we are aware of, but what they did looks impossible with what is known about them. Still, it obviously was possible. High technology seems very unlikely, as the pyramid's interior nooks and crannies are very roughly shaped. If they had a laser or other high-tech tools, logic predicts they would have used them everywhere, not just where it showed. I mean, this is, here it goes into like making general observations about the architect and stuff. Well, on the other hand, machining marks were visible on the inside of the sarcophagus wall from some rotary type cutting process. And this is what's been talked about a lot recently. Yep. Obviously, they had some mechanical help. Anyone who has been in the Great Pyramid and chanted or hummed will tell you that it feels weird and that the acoustic effect is powerful. In short, it is possible that the ancient builders may well have been aware that sounds, even inaudible ones, can have a profound effect on one's consciousness. The fact that they were able to quarry huge red granite blocks 600 miles away, transport them, machine them to a precise fit, and then polish them implies that there is an ocean about the ancients we don't know, especially regarding their application of acoustic science.
Wow.
That finishes the article.
That is a great article. I'll put the links to this in the show notes. It's from prosoundweb.com, which you said, what did you say? This was an audio magazine?
Yeah, this is kind of like a trade magazine for audio professionals.
That's fantastic.
Man, thanks for bringing that to the podcast, buddy. That was great.
Yeah, I'm just passing it along. Like this is originally got to me from Anthony, and we read it together and talked about it. It's just like I'm happy to share it with you guys.
Yeah. And Chris Dunn does talk about Tom Danley. That's how I was like, man, his name sounds familiar. But some of the stuff that he says in this article, like the bags of chipped stones up in the relieving chambers, Russ and I were like going all conspiracy theory on that.
Like, what are they looking for?
Because, yeah, he mentions that stuff in the book. So you should definitely read that book too. I think you would.
I'm going to.
Or you can. We did what was it?
You did the podcast on it.
We did a 6-part deep dive into it, reading huge sections from the book. So yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
You know what? One other thing that just jumps out of me from this article is that he's, it's just another guy who was there 20 years ago making the observations that we do.
Yeah.
It's just yet another point in time where these observations been made. You've been talking about Flinders Petrie and other guys who have seen this, and it's just like reinforces that.
Right. I also like that he points out, and again, this goes back to looking at the whole complex of the King's Chamber, not just, because when you're there, you're standing inside of the chamber, and you're doing is experiencing the chamber itself. But to remember that there's this massive superstructure, that the chamber is the bottom part of. You know, it's really there's this giant limestone opening in the core of the pyramid that's kind of centered in the middle of it, and the top of that chamber is way above the top of the king's chamber itself, and that top of that chamber is it has the peaked ceiling,
A vaulted ceiling,
like what you have down in the queen's chamber. So like you can imagine that the limestone superstructure around the king's chamber is like the queen's chamber, but stretched way out, made much taller. And inside of that, they built this
a granite box.
Yeah, they built a giant granite box with a series of strange hollows above it that seem to be tuned. It is just. And the whole thing is like isolated.
Yeah, so like think about the pyramid, the step pyramid, right? There's this giant chamber under the pyramid with this incredibly high ceiling, which the very top of is actually the bottom core masonry of the pyramid itself. And down in the base of that chamber is a giant granite box.
That's right.
So if our access to that granite box was through a granite hallway that entered the box, we could also come in there and be like, okay, we're in like a big granite room, having no idea that there's actually this giant limestone room that the granite box is inside of.
Yeah, it's like the granite box is placed inside of this giant limestone room.
A multi-piece granite box.
So it's like it's just so interesting to me that the chamber itself is actually like, you know, it's an isolated acoustical room inside of a, you know, like when you're building some studios, you build a room inside of a room, right? You build
a floating room.
A floating room, yeah. So the granite box of the king's chamber, including the floor, is floating within the limestone. The floor of the king's chamber is also granite. So it's all floating inside of it. And we've read in some places, was this in Dunn's book?
That the limestone floor underneath is actually corrugated. So it has these...
So it's touching the granite in as few places as possible so that the granite is actually floating
on top.
You know, that would mean that whatever happens inside the king's chamber is kind of like isolated there.
Yes.
So if there would be like an enormous, like as Tom Danley said here, he would trigger a resonance that was so powerful, like it could like destabilize the room.
Yeah.
It would only matter to that room.
That's
because it's decoupled from the rest of the structure.
That's right. And this is also how the entire room could have expanded an inch in every direction due to an explosion, because there is actually room for it to move. Yeah. Right? If it was actually completely contained within the core structure, it would have to push every freaking block around it to expand. But that's not what happened. Like, it did have room to move because it is isolated in there. It's
And going back to your observation about like the marimba idea, but think of it instead as strings. Basically, you have this resonant chamber, and then above it you have how many series of strings, like all precisely tuned strings floating above that box.
There's 5 relieving chambers, so that would be 4 sets of granite beams, starting with the ones that make up the ceiling of the king's chamber, right? Because the top of it is actually the vaulted ceiling of the limestone.
Yeah, so just thinking of all those granite beams as strings.
Yeah.
This is a bell, like you were saying. It's some kind of weird thing. So
where's the pickup?
Yeah, I know, right? Where's the pickup? This is really cool, man.
I mean, I need to check it, but I read somewhere that also the sarcophagus in the king's chamber. I will have to check this, but apparently it's supposed to be the dimensions of it. They couldn't have transported it in.
That's right.
It wouldn't fit.
It's too big for the hallway.
Constructed while the rest was being built.
That's right. It would have to have been placed in there in the room before the room was complete.
Before they put the ceiling on it.
Yeah.
Before the ceiling. Yeah.
Yeah.
And like in that text, I remember they said something about like the fact that you can see a drill overcut in the sarcophagus could point to that. They have been tuning the sarcophagus, and maybe the first one went bad, so they had to like quickly let's make a new one, and they were in a rush. We need to tune this, so it's good for the room.
Wow.
I mean that's pure speculation, but it's kind of a cool thought.
Yeah, it is
definitely.
Yeah, and I think again going back to Dunn and power plant book, which, you know, when you read, you'll see that like he talks about the granite coffer actually working as a, didn't he call it like it would be a focal device or a lens of some kind?
I can't remember how it works.
Like if right now, or at least when we went in, the granite box in the King's Chamber was all the way at the far end of the room from the entrance, like almost pushed up against the wall. Not quite, but basically pushed up against the back wall. But the idea is that it used to be placed more in the middle, right in between the two
Air shafts.
shafts that come in. So,
and I think it was even in the middle, and somebody that was there with us that had, we talked to Graham. I think Graham.
Graham from Grimerica
when
said
he went there,
it was in the middle of the room, not all the way at the end like it was when we saw it.
And that was in the 90s or something.
Yeah. So more than 20 years ago.
So they've been moving that around.
Yeah, they've moved it multiple times. So it's not you can't tell where it used to be, but the idea is that it would, that it would be placed in the middle of the room or between the two square holes that make up the shafts. Now, obviously, one of them now, when you go in the King's Chamber now, what you see is a big opening where the fan is, because it was Chris Dunn Gantenbrink was hired to put a circulation system in there. Yeah. So I noticed that when we went into the King's Chamber, on one side you have the square hole for the shaft. So like right when you walk in the room, that shaft is on the right, and the one that's in front of you is the big. It's been damaged, and that's where Gantenbrink stuck the air circulator, the fan, which no longer works. Hasn't worked since 2 years after he installed it. But it's still in there 30 years later. Still in.
And they have these little cheap air coolers.
Yeah, they have dehumidifiers.
And they just sound like crap.
That's right. There. They have dehumidifiers in there. Yeah, exactly.
I turned one off when I went in there. And he was like, no, turn on.
Yeah. I can't believe you turned it off.
Yes.
No, that's great.
Turn on.
Yeah, no, turned on.
Well, Sebastian, we're going to have to do another episode because we didn't even get into the
these guys have.
We spent an hour and a half trying to prep some stuff and that we never used. So
we should have known.
We definitely let's work on that, because that's why we spent an hour and a half, because we were both grumbling that we didn't have our shit together.
Yeah. So both of these guys have recordings from when they were inside of various boxes. Definitely stuff from the Serapeum that we need to get into. So we'd love to have you back. So that would be great.
I would love to.
All right. Awesome.
Sure.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on the show, buddy.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, yeah. All right.
And there you have it, folks. That was our first interview with Sebastian. He did say he'll be coming back, so that's great. Hope you enjoyed that. I thought it was fantastic.
Yeah, same here.
Yeah. And we had heard of Tom Danley from Chris Dunn, so Sebastian read most of that article on the show. That was really good. Get some more details there. And we got a couple of people to thank for this episode.
That's right. We have Associate Executive Producer Antonio Kazlievich. I'm assuming from Sweden.
Yeah.
He says, "Hey, I love your show. Thanks for everything and glad you made it to Egypt. I'm so glad you live stream many of the sites and want to give you my money as thanks. Thanks again for the podcast every week." And then Good Jul from Sverige. Snake Bros from Antonio. Thank you very much, Antonio.
Thank you.
$50. And then we have another $50 donation from Greg Taylor. So another associate executive producer there. Thank you very much, Greg.
I got a note from him here that I can read. Real quick, he says, "Greetings, Slithering Russ and Kyle. My sister turned me on to you guys and your spectacular podcast a while back, and I was addicted at first listen. You keep me company on my hour-plus drive into the office and on the way home. She also is the one that started me down the rabbit holes of ancient history by giving me 3 of Graham Hancock's book for Christmas a few years ago. After listening to Graham and the mention of Randall, I then had to check him out, and what a mind-bending journey. Many years ago, I was listening to Anthony Robbins. He was talking about testing for how a person sorts things in their world. I discovered that I was a different sorter. He gave a little test that was comprised of asking a question of what the relationship was between a quarter, a nickel, and a dime. I immediately thought they are all different sizes, values, and faces, possibly metal composition. Then it was explained that 80% of the population was sameness sorters, with the balance being different sorters. So, like, most people would associate them with how they're the same, but he thought of how they're different. So he says, our father was very curious with history and researched the locations of old Indian campsites. He took us arrowhead hunting, and I loved every minute. I totally relate to your statement of when finding a bird point, it connects you to the maker. I have a shoebox full of points, scrapers, spear points, and he also gave me a very nice intact grinding bowl.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
And he says he was curious about the pyramids from a young age, and he wants to thank us for taking him along on the trips and with the way that we describe every detail.
Oh, man.
Yeah, so thank you so much. And he says, I won't bore you with any more about me. Thanks again for all the laughs and brain expansion. Snacks! And he made a $50 donation. So thank you so much, buddy.
Thank you both.
Yeah.
For those donations. Much appreciated. And thanks to everybody who does smaller donations as well. We appreciate all those, but you remain anonymous.
That's right. And you can find the donation page on the website, brothersoftheserpent.com. Just go there and click a pyramid scheme. And you can find it there, PayPal or Patreon. And there's also some crypto wallet addresses there. So thanks to all of you who've done that. And one other thing, we finally monetized the YouTube channel. So if you've been wondering why there are a lot more commercials on there than there used to be, that's why. I need to go in there and tweak the settings. But yes, YouTube started putting commercials in whether you were monetized or not. So I decided to go ahead and monetize it because we might as well get paid if they're going to be commercials anyway.
Yeah. Plus, we want to be able to do the super chats.
That's right. People asked about super chat donations
when we're live streaming.
You have to monetize for that. So yeah, wanted to let everybody know about that. And brothersoftheserpent@gmail.com if you want to send us an email. And yeah, I think that's it.
Thanks to Sebastian. See you again soon, buddy.
That's right. And we love all of you guys.
Always have.
Always will.
Good night, Adamu.
Get back to work.